Well, this is time for a big mood shift on this podcast, Chris, from the amazing future of robotics and AI to tech leaders taking a vow of fealty and taking the knee and kissing the ring of the incoming administration and Donald Trump. So we're recording this on the 14th of January. It is 1 week away from the inauguration of Donald Trump. And what we are seeing is tech companies all over the place just falling over themselves to unwind, I guess, a lot of the things that they've done over the last few years and really align themselves a lot more with the Donald Trump MAGA worldview. So we've talked, and I think, Chris, you and Human did quite a good job last time talking about some of the actual tech folks coming into the administration. But now let's talk about, for example, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta. So Mark Zuckerberg has both vibe shifted in terms of what he says, right? He went on the Joe Rogan podcast and said a whole bunch of things about freedom of speech and about how the industry needs more masculine energy. And this is really quite regressive sort of bro sort of stuff. But also there've been some really significant changes at Meta. So let's start with some of the leadership, right? Nick Clegg was Meta's head of policy. And he was, before he was at Meta, he was a centrist politician from the UK who, said all the right things and, was somewhat progressive and so on. He's now been replaced by a prominent Republican called Joel Kaplan. And so straight away, this is signaling a change. It's a sort of a vibe shift and a real shift in terms of how Facebook thinks about policy and how Facebook is going to go forward. And straight away, there have been these changes. For example, to fact checking is now being removed, Chris. That's a huge change. Facebook's hate speech policies have become more liberal. They've moved away from their internal DEI policies. And so all of these things that have kind of been Republican talking points and whipping boys, Facebook is stepping away from. And one other thing I would point out is that there have been some changes to Facebook's board of directors. I think one very prominent change is that Dana White, who is the head of the UFC, closely allied with Joe Rogan and the Republican Party, is now on the board. And so again, I think if you go back in time 15, 20 years ago, or even less, Silicon Valley was a sort of left-wing, capital P progressive sort of place, quite strongly aligned with Democrats and so on. And now it's a complete 180, right? Where we are seeing, maybe not the employees, but we're seeing the leaders align themselves very closely with the new regime. And it's fascinating. And to me, at least, Chris, I think it's kind of scary.
Look, this is really complicated, and I started to touch on it earlier. I think this is a tale of two cities. On one hand, there is truth to some of what Trump's surrogates, puppet masters, advocates talk about. There have been some fundamental problems around focusing on regulation through litigation and slow walking development versus focusing on growth. There has been regulation through litigation and FUD instead of embracing a new financial system like Bitcoin. It is true that the US government is a giant bureaucratic mess. People like to laugh about the DMV, but it is operated in such an unwieldy and inefficient way with laws and processes and systems and departments that are archaic and almost designed to be anti-human, anti-citizen. It is true that there are DEI programs that are anti-meritocratic. That is true. And I actually have been in a meeting. I've been in a situation where I was judging a hackathon, for example, and literally the judging room started with, we're going to make sure a woman wins, right? These things, there is truth to them. However, the human beings, the individuals who are espousing these truths from Donald Trump down, are capricious, have two-dimensional thinking where they're willing to move fast and break things. And unfortunately, they're breaking livelihoods for people, often the most vulnerable. They lack empathy. They're bullies. And in some cases, they're anti-democratic and criminal. So you can both believe in a pro-growth, pro-Bitcoin, pro-innovation, pro-American supremacy even, or manifest destiny agenda, while also believing that people who call for, the overthrow of a fair election are the wrong people to facilitate such a change. And the last point I'll make is that some of the problems they're pointing to a lack of faith in institutions, criminality, and so on and so forth, are the result of their own actions, of the Republican Party undermining
Yes.
American democracy, if belief in institutions, truth, justice, and the American way. And so it is such a complicated web of thoughts and feelings you have to have about this. It's not enough to say Trump administration bad, Kamala good. It's not enough to say Kamala incompetent, which is a fucking lie. Trump is competent. No, that's just dumb. But I've started to develop very, very mixed feelings about the whole thing and taking a somewhat of a wait and see approach. And I've got my Australian passport ready to go to fly back to the safety of our beautiful country. So we'll see how it goes.
I sort of half-ish agree with you, but I think I would take a more extreme view of this, right? Which is, it's easy to point out problems with how the world works, with how governments run. And yes, okay, there are bureaucracies, there are some excesses, for example, in diversity programs and so on. My big issue with this incoming regime and their surrogates, Chris, is I see a total lack of good faith. I don't believe they are there to fix the problems. They are there to blow things up and make the world a more comfortable place for themselves and people like themselves, right? Like, you look at the Department of Government Efficiency, which is not a department, right? Hasn't been set up properly. And sure, okay, they haven't started doing anything yet, but they're just talking about like blowing up entire departments, running this thing like Twitter or X, and getting rid of really important things and not doing the hard work of real reform, right? Of course, it would be good to improve the efficiency of government, but you can't start from a position of hating government, of not believing that government provides any value, which is patently false. And anybody who does that, I can't engage in a good faith argument with someone who thinks that governments are evil when you have a look at everything that we have today and the important role that government has played in that. So it's just nuts, right? You can't say, oh, some diversity, equity, and inclusion programs have gone too far, so let's just get rid of them and let's pretend that the status quo of, certain groups, in particular men from certain ethnic backgrounds, kind of being overrepresented in all the positions of power, is a reflection of meritocracy, when it clearly isn't, right? If something is not optimal, then you fix it. You don't blow it up. You don't hate on it. And so these people, they're just there to destroy. That's what I see, Chris. And so it doesn't matter if they have some basic insights that are like, true. It's because those things are being weaponized for destruction rather than to make the world a better place and to build on what those before them have accomplished and make them better. Whatever credit you're giving them, I feel you're giving them a bit too much.
Well, I'm only giving them a sliver of credit because I think the conversation is often all too lacking in nuance. And you're right that the Republican Party in general, although it's unrecognizable now, has always been very good at pointing out social wedge issues in order to win elections and then basically economically rape the country and to ensure that there's a massive redistribution of wealth to the top and then to basically redistrict and jerry-rig so that they can try to reinforce their power.
But you meant gerrymander, right?
I did mean gerrymander, yes. And so you're right that this may also be just another form of that, which is, we're going to use this kind of pro-growth, pro-whatever agenda to capture people's sense of being mired in bureaucracy to then come and basically reorganize the world kind of to allow Elon Musk to do whatever the hell he wants and to accrue all that power for himself. But look, the real topic here, we're a startup and tech podcast. This is really about how the tech leaders are reacting to this. And, the one I want to speak about first and maybe most is Zuckerberg and his move to turn off fact-checking and to turn off DEI programs. I got a couple of feelings about this. Number one, I was a bit surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I was a bit surprised that he would turn off the fact-checking system that they designed, because I've been on record on this show multiple times speaking about both how I admire the surgical nature that he's tried, the restrained nature in which he's tried to take some responsibility for the conversation without muting dissenting voices and conversation. And they've been accused of doing too much by the right and too little by the left.
Which means it's probably about right.
Which means he's exactly about right. And I've been on this show defending him, saying, no, he's doing exactly the right amount. It's surgical, it's precise, and any calls for him to do more is at odds with also questioning the amount of power he has. Like, people are going, Mark Zuckerberg is too powerful. He should do more to control the conversation. It's like, I'm sorry, what? Which of those two things do you want? And the fact is, I believe he threaded the needle very, very well. And now it's sort of like this is the last step. He's gone kind of UFC fighter guy, relaxed hair and chain guy. And now it's like no DEI and moderation guy. He's like it's sort of snapped into focus. Oh shit, he's Joe Rogan Trump guy. He went full MAGA with one final, it clicked into place. I was like, what? When did that happen? So this is disappointing and demoralizing. On the DEI side, man, this conversation is so complicated and so fraught. Is there real problems with DEI in the world? Yes. Is there real problems with power differentials between men and women in the workplace and other places? Yes. Have some of these DEI programs, and when I say some, I mean too many, been used as a cudgel, been used to diminish or put a chill in the air for frank and honest conversations about the role of men and women, of work, of work-life balance, of race and equity and equality? Yes. We need to find a way to include everybody in the conversation and to not make that conversation the only conversation. It's a very, very complicated line to walk. I reject the all-in podcast narrative, which is these things are wholesale bad and there is no merit to them whatsoever. And I reject the liberal narrative, which is like power structures and the patriarchy is the cause of all evil. That is not true either. There is something in the middle, and we need to find it. And we need to continue to kind of collaborate as human beings.
I largely agree with you. And again, my issue with the incoming administration and then now folks like Zuckerberg who are aligning themselves with it is a lack of good faith. They want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. They want to go back to how things were. You can't say, oh, well, existing DEI programs weren't fit for purpose and they were going too far, so we're going to end them. But we still care about diversity, because he then goes on Joe Rogan's podcast and he says, what business needs is more masculine energy. I mean, Jesus Christ, this is not good faith. This is just men wanting to go back to the future, right? To go back to a world that was convenient for them, where they didn't have to consider other perspectives, where they didn't have to be inclusive or sensitive to others. And it's not progress. It is the opposite of progress. Yes, was there overreach? Of course, right? And so when something goes too far, you pull it back in. You don't destroy it. And, I think anybody who says that before DEI programs we were living in meritocracy is either an idiot or arguing in complete bad faith. And so, you can't get rid of DEI programs and not replace them with anything. That is not good faith arguing.
It's, I guess pretty much everything we've both said is about the, arguing for the virtue of balance and nuance.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to tell if some of these people are arguing in good faith or not. Some of them. Many of them are not. They are spineless, craven, hypocritical people. And I'm all the people who called Trump dangerous and deranged, who are now bending the knee. These people are the problem, and who speak without any nuance about what some of his virtues might be and some of his or all of his foibles. But I think there are a few on the fringes. Let's even Sam Altman, who was talking about some of the benefits that might come with the Trump administration, who speak with nuance, who genuinely want to see merit-based decision-making and pro-growth agenda without, I think, buying the whole MAGA bullshit hook, line, and sinker. I think you get Joe Rogan and Mark Zuckerberg, who are both, UFC nuts in a room. I think it's pretty easy to imagine how the conversation moves to masculine energy pretty quickly.
Yeah, but it's not okay. It's not okay to get rid of DEI programs and then say you need more masculine energy. How are we going to get to true meritocracy with that attitude?
I'm also, quite disappointed with the whole oh yeah, everyone's going to put in $1 million. It's like they're paying their vig, right? It's like a mob boss.
Yeah. There's definitely mob vibes. So, again, I think fascinating thing about the second Trump term is folks seem to have accepted that the president of the United States now is a transactional person who is not ruling or governing for the greater good, but is a sort of very transactional person who you need to kiss the ring, you need to take fealty, you need to give him something in order to get something in return, right? And the way, if you are powerful, the way to stay powerful is to align yourself with Trump, right? And of course, the person who did it first and did it best was Elon Musk. And now everyone's following, right? Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos has also become a craven toady, which is really disappointing. He's the owner of the Washington Post. He was doing a good job for a long time. And now he's stepping in and basically censoring anything that is critical of himself or Trump. It's pretty disappointing to see all of these powerful folks who are just completely rolling over and saying, you know what, the way I retain my power is by doing what President Trump wants me to do.
It's disappointing to see. And then if this goes the worst case scenario, it's going to be horrifying to see. Now, here's the good news. Let's end on a positive note. I've been on record saying, he has no checks and balances. He controls, the executive, the judicial, the legislature, and in some ways he owns the media as well, or at least massive media apparatus. And so I've been saying, like, guys, there's no checks on this guy's power. The good news is, he has barely a hair's breadth control of the House. He does not have unanimous support from his party in there. And there's only so much he can get done. And, the US has been characterized by backlashes to backlashes to backlashes through much of its history. You could argue that there has been a culture war to inculcate DEI, woke, what they would classify as anti-meritocratic values and, let's say, low growth or anti-growth policies for quite some time. I'm taking their position here. I'm not saying I believe this. And this is a backlash to that. The bark may be worse than the bite because they can't actually do everything they want to do. We'll have 4 years of this, transactional, cynical, anti-woke, whatever. And then there'll be another backlash. And there'll be people who look for a much more ethical, moral, aspirational leader, the next Barack Obama. And then they'll come in and they'll do the next thing. Of course, all of that breaks if he truly breaks the institutions of democracy. And I think he's done a lot to already achieve that result. And so we'll have to hold on to our butts and see what happens for the next 4 years.